Future Primitive by John Zerzan, 1992. Narrated by an artificial intelligence based on the voice of Orson Welles. Produced by Parker Banks at pbanks.net and youtube.com/pbanks. Narrator's note: due to the extensive use of parenthetical references throughout this work, most references have been removed from the text to enhance readability. However, narrative citations have been retained with dates removed. A link to the original paper is provided in the description. Division of labor, which has had so much to do with bringing us to the present global crisis, works daily to prevent our understanding the origins of this horrendous present. Mary Lacron Foster surely errs on the side of understatement in allowing that anthropology is today in danger of serious and damaging fragmentation. Shanks and Tilly voice a rare related challenge. The point of archaeology is not merely to interpret the past, but to change the manner in which the past is interpreted in the service of social reconstruction in the present. Of course, the social sciences themselves work against the breadth and depth of vision necessary to such a reconstruction. In terms of human origins and development, the array of splintered fields and subfields, anthropology, archaeology, paleontology, ethnology, paleobotany, ethnoanthropology, etc., mirrors the narrowing, crippling effect that civilization has embodied from its very beginning. Nonetheless, the literature can provide highly useful assistance if approached with an appropriate method and awareness, and the desire to proceed past its limitations. In fact, the weakness of more or less orthodox modes of thinking can and does yield to the demands of an increasingly dissatisfied society. Unhappiness with contemporary life becomes distrust with the official lies that are told to legitimate that life, and a truer picture of human development emerges. Renunciation and subjugation in modern life have long been explained as necessary concomitants of human nature. After all, our pre-civilized existence of deprivation, brutality, and ignorance made authority a benevolent gift that rescued us from savagery. Caveman and Neanderthal are still invoked to remind us where we would be without religion, government, and toil. This ideological view of our past has been radically overturned in recent decades through the work of academics like Richard Lee and Marshall Salins. A nearly complete reversal in anthropological orthodoxy has come about with important implications. Now we can see that life before domestication and agriculture was in fact largely one of leisure, intimacy with nature, sensual wisdom, sexual equality, and health. This was our human nature for a couple of million years prior to enslavement by priests, kings, and bosses. And lately, another stunning revelation has appeared, a related one that deepens the first and may be telling us something equally important about who we were and what we might again become. The main line of attack against new descriptions of gatherer-hunter life has been, though often indirect or not explicitly stated, to characterize that life condescendingly as the most an evolving species could achieve at an early stage. Thus, the argument allows that there was a long period of apparent grace and pacific existence, but says that humans simply didn't have the mental capacity to leave simple ways behind in favor of complex social and technological achievement. In another fundamental blow to civilization, we now learn that not only was human life once and for so long a state that did not know alienation or domination, but as the investigations since the 80s by archaeologist John Fowlett, Thomas Wynne, and others have shown, those humans possessed an intelligence at least equal to our own. At a stroke, as it were, the ignorance thesis is disposed of, and we contemplate where we came from in a new light. To put the issue of mental capacity in context, it is useful to review the various and again ideologically loaded interpretations of human origins and development. Robert Ardrey served up a bloodthirsty macho version of prehistory, as have to slightly lesser degrees Desmond Morris and Lionel Tiger. Similarly, Freud and Konrad Lorenz wrote of the innate depravity of the species, thereby providing their contributions to hierarchy and power in the present. Fortunately, a far more plausible outlook has emerged, one that corresponds to the overall version of Paleolithic life in general. Food sharing has for some time been considered an integral part of earliest human society. Jane Goodall and Richard Leakey, among others, have concluded that it was the key element in establishing our uniquely Homo development at least as early as 2 million years ago. This emphasis, carried forward since the early 70s by Linton, Zillman, Tanner, and Isaac, has become ascendant. One of the telling arguments in favor of the cooperation thesis, as against that of generalized violence and male domination, involves a diminishing, during early evolution, of the difference in size and strength between males and females. Sexual dimorphism, as it is called, was originally very pronounced, including such features as prominent canines or fighting teeth in males and much smaller canines for the female. The disappearance of large male canines strongly suggests that the female of the species exercised a selection for sociable sharing males. Most apes today have significantly longer and larger canines, male to female, in the absence of this female choice capacity. Division of labor between the sexes is another key area in human beginnings, a condition once simply taken for granted and expressed by the term hunter-gatherer. Now it is widely accepted that gathering of plant foods, once thought to be the exclusive domain of women and of secondary importance to hunting by males, constituted the main food source. Since females were not significantly dependent on males for food, it seems likely that rather than division of labor, flexibility and joint activity would have been central. As Zillman points out, an overall behavioral flexibility may have been the primary ingredient in early human existence. Joan Garrow has demonstrated that stone tools were as likely to have been made by women as by men, and indeed, Poirier reminds us that there is no archaeological evidence supporting the contention that early humans exhibited a sexual division of labor. It is unlikely that food collecting involved much, if any, division of labor, and probably that sexual specialization came quite late in human evolution. So if the adaptation that began our species centered on gathering, when did hunting come in? Binford has argued that there is no indication of use of animal products, that is evidence of butchery practices, until the appearance, relatively quite recent, of anatomically modern humans. Electron microscope studies of fossil teeth found in East Africa suggest a diet composed primarily of fruit, while a similar examination of stone tools from a 1.5 million-year-old site at Kubi Fora in Kenya shows that they were used on plant materials. The small amount of meat in the early Paleolithic diet was probably scavenged rather than hunted. The natural condition of the species was evidently a diet made up largely of vegetables rich in fiber, as opposed to the modern high-fat and animal protein diet with its attendant chronic disorders. Though our early forebears employed their detailed knowledge of the environment and cognitive mapping in the service of a plant-gathering subsistence, the archaeological evidence for hunting appears to slowly increase with time. Much evidence, however, has overturned assumptions as to widespread prehistoric hunting. Collections of bones seen earlier as evidence of large kills of mammals, for example, have turned out to be, upon closer examination, the results of movement by flowing water or caches by animals. Louis Binford's Were There Elephant Hunters at Turalba is a good instance of such a closer look, in which he doubts there was significant hunting until 200,000 years ago or sooner. Adrian Zillman has concluded that hunting arose relatively late in evolution and may not extend beyond the last 100,000 years. And there are many who do not see evidence for serious hunting of large mammals until even later, namely the later Upper Paleolithic, just before the emergence of agriculture. The oldest known surviving artifacts are stone tools from Hadar in eastern Africa. With more refined dating methods, they may prove to be 3.1 million years old. Perhaps the main reason these may be classified as representing human effort is that they involve the crafting of one tool by using another, a uniquely human attribute so far as we know. Homo habilis, or handyman, designates what has been thought of as the first known human species, its name reflecting association with the earliest stone tools. Basic wooden and bone implements, though more perishable and thus scantily represented in the archaeological record, were also used by Homo habilis as part of a remarkably simple and effective adaptation in Africa and Asia. Our ancestors at this stage had smaller brains and bodies than we do, but Poirier notes that their postcranial anatomy was rather like modern humans, and Holloway allows that his studies of cranial endocasts from this period indicate a basically modern brain organization. Similarly, tools older than 2 million years have been found to exhibit a consistent right-handed orientation in the ways stone has been flaked off in their formation. Right-handedness as a tendency is correlated in moderns with such distinctly human features as pronounced lateralization of the brain and marked functional separation of the cerebral hemispheres. Klein concludes that basic human cognitive and communicational abilities are almost certainly implied. Homo erectus is the other main predecessor to Homo sapiens according to long-standing usage, appearing about 1.75 million years ago as humans moved out of forests into drier, more open African grasslands. Although brain size alone does not necessarily correlate with mental capacity, the cranial capacity of Homo erectus overlaps with that of moderns, such that this species must have been capable of many of the same behaviors. As Johansen and Edey put it, if the largest-brained erectus were to be rated against the smallest-brained sapiens, all their other characteristics ignored, their species names would have to be reversed. Homo neanderthalis, which immediately preceded us, possessed brains somewhat larger than our own, though of course the much maligned Neanderthal has been pictured as a primitive, brutish creature, in keeping with the prevailing Hobbesian ideology, despite manifest intelligence as well as enormous physical strength. Recently, however, the whole species framework has become a doubtful proposition. Attention has been drawn to the fact that fossil specimens from various Homo species all show intermediate morphological traits, leading to suspicion of an arbitrary division of humanity into separate taxa. Fagan, for example, tells us that it is very hard to draw a clear taxonomic boundary between Homo erectus and archaic Homo sapiens on the one hand, and between archaic and anatomically modern Homo sapiens on the other. Likewise, Foley, the anatomical distinctions between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens are not great. Jelinek flatly declares that there is no good reason, anatomical or cultural, for separating erectus and sapiens into two species, and has concluded that people from at least the Middle Paleolithic onward may be viewed as Homo sapiens. The tremendous upward revision of early intelligence discussed below must be seen as connected to the present confusion over species, as the once prevailing overall evolutionary model gives way. But the controversy over species categorization is only interesting in the context of how our earliest forebears lived. Despite the minimal nature of what could be expected to survive so many millennia, we can glimpse some of the texture of that life, with its often elegant pre-division of labor approaches. The toolkit from the Olduvai Gorge area made famous by the Leakeys contains at least 6 clearly recognizable tool types, dating from about 1.7 million years ago. There soon appeared the Acheulean hand axe, with its symmetrical beauty, in use for about 1 million years. Teardrop-shaped and possessed of a remarkable balance, it exudes grace and utility from an era much prior to symbolization. Isaac noted that the basic needs for sharp edges that humans have can be met from the varied range of forms generated from Oldowan patterns of stone flaking, wondering how it came to be thought that more complex equals better adapted. In this distant early time, according to cut marks found on surviving bones, humans were using scavenged animal sinews and skins for such things as cord, bags, and rugs. Further evidence suggests furs for cave wall coverings and seats, and seaweed beds for sleeping. The use of fire goes back almost 2 million years, and might have appeared even earlier, but for the tropical conditions of humanity's original African homeland, as Poirier implies. Perfected firemaking included the firing of caves to eliminate insects and heated pebble floors, amenities that show up very early in the Paleolithic. As John Gowlett notes, there are still some archaeologists who consider anything earlier than Homo sapiens, a mere 30,000 years ago, as greatly more primitive than we fully human types. But along with the documentation, referred to above, of fundamentally modern brain anatomy even in early humans, this minority must now contend with recent work depicting complete human intelligence as present virtually with the birth of the Homo species. Thomas Wynne judged manufacture of the Acheulean hand axe to have required a stage of intelligence that is typical of fully modern adults. Gowlett, like Wynne, examines the required operational thinking involved in the right hammer, the right force, and the right striking angle in an ordered sequence and with flexibility needed for modifying the procedure. He contends that manipulation, concentration, visualization of form in 3 dimensions, and planning were needed, and that these requirements were the common property of early human beings as much as 2 million years ago. And this, he adds, is hard knowledge, not speculation. During the vast time span of the Paleolithic, there were remarkably few changes in technology. Innovation over 2.5 million years measured in stone tool development was practically nil, according to Gerhard Krauss. Seen in the light of what we now know of prehistoric intelligence, such stagnation is especially vexing to many social scientists. It is difficult to comprehend such slow development in the judgment of Weimer. It strikes me as very plausible that intelligence, informed by the success and satisfaction of a gatherer-hunter existence, is the very reason for the pronounced absence of progress. Division of labor, domestication, symbolic culture, these were evidently refused until very recently. Contemporary thought, in its postmodern incarnation, would like to rule out the reality of a divide between nature and culture. Given the abilities present among people before civilization, however, it may be more accurate to say that basically they long chose nature over culture. It is also popular to see almost every human act or object as symbolic, a position which is, generally speaking, part of the denial of a nature versus culture distinction. But it is culture as the manipulation of basic symbolic forms that is involved here. It also seems clear that reified time, language, written certainly and probably spoken language for all or most of this period, number and art had no place despite an intelligence fully capable of them. I would like to interject in passing my agreement with Goldschmidt that the hidden dimension in the construction of the symbolic world is time. And as Norman O'Brien put it, life not repressed is not in historical time, which I take as a reminder that time as a materiality is not inherent in reality, but a cultural imposition, perhaps the first cultural imposition on it. As this elemental dimension of symbolic culture progresses, so does, by equal steps, alienation from the natural. Cohen has discussed symbols as essential for the development and maintenance of social order, which implies, as does more forcefully a great deal of positive evidence, that before the emergence of symbols there was no condition of disorder requiring them. In a similar vein, Levi Strauss pointed out that mythical thought always progresses from the awareness of oppositions toward their resolution. So whence the absence of order, the conflicts or oppositions? The literature on the Paleolithic contains almost nothing that deals with this essential question, among thousands of monographs on specific features. A reasonable hypothesis, in my opinion, is that division of labor, unnoticed because of its glacially slow pace and not sufficiently understood because of its newness, began to cause small fissures in the human community and unhealthy practices vis-a-vis nature. In the later Upper Paleolithic, 15,000 years ago, we begin to observe specialized collection of plants in the Middle East and specialized hunting, observed Gowlett. The sudden appearance of symbolic activities, for example, ritual and art, in the Upper Paleolithic has definitely seemed to archaeologists one of prehistory's big surprises, given the absence of such behaviors in the Middle Paleolithic. But signs of division of labor and specialization were making their presence felt as a breakdown of wholeness and natural order, a lack that needed redressing. What is surprising is that this transition to civilization can still be seen as benign. Foster seems to celebrate it by concluding that the symbolic mode has proved extraordinarily adaptive, else why has Homo sapiens become material master of the world? He is certainly correct, as he is to recognize the manipulation of symbols to be the very stuff of culture. But he appears oblivious to the fact that this successful adaptation has brought alienation and destruction of nature along to their present horrifying prominence. It is reasonable to assume that the symbolic world originated in the formulation of language, which somehow appeared from a matrix of extensive nonverbal communication and face-to-face contact. There is no agreement as to when language began, but no evidence exists of speech before the cultural explosion of the later Upper Paleolithic. It seems to have acted as an inhibiting agent, a way of bringing life under greater control, stemming the flood of images and sensations to which the pre-modern individual was open. In this sense, it would have likely marked an early turning away from a life of openness and communion with nature toward one more oriented to the overlordship and domestication that followed symbolic culture's inauguration. It is probably a mistake, by the way, to assume that thought is advanced, if there were such a thing as neutral thought, whose advance could be universally appreciated, because we actually think in language. There is no conclusive evidence that we must do so. There are many cases involving stroke and like impairments of patients who have lost speech, including the ability to talk silently to themselves, who were fully capable of coherent thought of all kinds. These data strongly suggest that human intellectual skill is uniquely powerful, even in the absence of language. In terms of symbolization in action, Goldschmidt seems correct in judging that the Upper Paleolithic invention of ritual may well have been the keystone in the structure of culture that gave it its great impetus for expansion. Ritual has played a number of pivotal roles in what Hodder termed the relentless unfolding of symbolic and social structures accompanying the arrival of cultural mediation. It was as a means of achieving and consolidating social cohesion that ritual was essential. Totemic rituals, for example, reinforce clan unity. The start of an appreciation of domestication or taming of nature is seen in a cultural ordering of the wild through ritual. Evidently, the female as a cultural category, namely that seen as wild or dangerous, dates from this period. The ritual Venus figurines appear as of 25,000 years ago and seem to be an example of earliest symbolic likeness of women for the purpose of representation and control. Even more concretely, subjugation of the wild occurs at this time in the first systematic hunting of large mammals. Ritual was an integral part of this activity. Ritual, as shamanic practice, may also be considered as a regression from that state in which all shared a consciousness we would now classify as extrasensory. When specialists alone claim access to such perceptual heights as may have once been communal, further backward moves in division of labor are facilitated or enhanced. The way back to bliss through ritual is a virtually universal mythic theme, promising the dissolution of measurable time, among other joys. This theme of ritual points to an absence that it falsely claims to fill, as does symbolic culture in general. Ritual as a means of organizing emotions, a method of cultural direction and restraint, introduces art, a facet of ritual expressiveness. There can be little doubt to Gans that the various forms of secular art derive originally from ritual. We can detect the beginning of an unease, a feeling that an earlier direct authenticity is departing. Labarre, I believe, is correct in judging that art and religion alike arise from unsatisfied desire. At first, more abstractly as language, then more purposively as ritual and art, culture steps in to deal artificially with spiritual and social anxiety. Ritual and magic must have dominated early Upper Paleolithic art and were probably essential, along with an increasing division of labor, for the coordination and direction of community. Similarly, Pfeiffer has depicted the famous Upper Paleolithic European cave paintings as the original form of initiating youth into now complex social systems, as necessary for order and discipline. And art may have contributed to the control of nature as part of development of the earliest territorialism, for example. The emergence of symbolic culture, with its inherent will to manipulate and control, soon opened the door to domestication of nature. After 2 million years of human life within the bounds of nature in balance with other wild species, agriculture changed our lifestyle, our way of adapting, in an unprecedented way. Never before has such a radical change occurred in a species so utterly and so swiftly. Self-domestication through language, ritual, and art inspired the taming of plants and animals that followed. Appearing only 10,000 years ago, farming quickly triumphed, for control by its very nature invites intensification. Once the will to production broke through, it became more productive the more efficiently it was exercised, and hence more ascendant and adaptive. Agriculture enables greatly increased division of labor, establishes the material foundations of social hierarchy, and initiates environmental destruction. Priests, kings, drudgery, sexual inequality, warfare are a few of its fairly immediate specific consequences. Whereas Paleolithic peoples enjoyed a highly varied diet, using several thousand species of plants for food, with farming, these sources were vastly reduced. Given the intelligence and the very great practical knowledge of Stone Age humanity, the question has often been asked, why didn't agriculture begin at, say, 1 million BC rather than about 8,000 BC? I have provided a brief answer in terms of slowly accelerating alienation in the form of division of labor and symbolization. But given how negative the results were, it is still a bewildering phenomenon. Thus, as Binford put it, the question to be asked is not why agriculture was not developed everywhere, but why it was developed at all. The end of gatherer-hunter life brought a decline in size, stature, and skeletal robusticity, and introduced tooth decay, nutritional deficiencies, and most infectious diseases. Taken as a whole, an overall decline in the quality and probably the length of human life, concluded Cohen and Amalagos. Another outcome was the invention of number, unnecessary before the ownership of crops, animals, and land that is one of agriculture's hallmarks. The development of number further impelled the urge to treat nature as something to be dominated. Writing was also required by domestication for the earliest business transactions and political administration. Levi Strauss has argued persuasively that the primary function of written communication was to facilitate exploitation and subjugation. Cities and empires, for example, would be impossible without it. Here we see clearly the joining of the logic of symbolization and the growth of capital. Conformity, repetition, and regularity were the keys to civilization upon its triumph, replacing the spontaneity, enchantment, and discovery of the pre-agricultural human state that survived so very long. Clarke cites a gatherer-hunter amplitude of leisure, deciding it was this and the pleasurable way of life that went with it, rather than penury and a day-long grind, that explains why social life remained so static. One of the most enduring and widespread myths is that there was once a golden age, characterized by peace and innocence, and that something happened to destroy this idol and consign us to misery and suffering. Eden, or whatever name it goes by, was the home of our primeval forager ancestors, and expresses the yearning of disillusioned tillers of the soil for a lost life of freedom and relative ease. The once rich environs people inhabited prior to domestication and agriculture are now virtually non-existent. For the few remaining foragers, there exist only the most marginal lands, those isolated places as yet unwanted by agriculture, and surviving gatherer hunters who have somehow managed to evade civilization's tremendous pressures to turn them into slaves, that is, farmers, political subjects, wage laborers, have all been influenced by contact with outside peoples. Duffy points out that the present-day gatherer hunters he studied, the Mbuti pygmies of Central Africa, have been acculturated by surrounding villager agriculturalists for hundreds of years, and to some extent by generations of contact with government authorities and missionaries. And yet it seems that an impulse toward authentic life can survive down through the ages. Try to imagine, he counsels, a way of life where land, shelter, and food are free, and where there are no leaders, bosses, politics, organized crime, taxes, or laws. Add to this the benefits of being part of a society where everything is shared, where there are no rich people and no poor people, and where happiness does not mean the accumulation of material possessions. The Mbuti have never domesticated animals or planted crops. Among the members of non-agriculturalist bands resides a highly sane combination of little work and material abundance. Bodley discovered that the San, aka Bushmen, of the harsh Kalahari Desert of southern Africa work fewer hours and fewer of their number work than do the neighboring cultivators. In times of drought, moreover, it has been the San to whom the farmers have turned for their survival. They spend strikingly little time laboring and much time at rest and leisure, according to Tanaka, while others have commented on San vitality and freedom compared with sedentary farmers, their relatively secure and easygoing life. Flood noted that to Australian Aborigines, the labor involved in tilling and planting outweighed the possible advantages. Speaking more generally, Tanaka has pointed to the abundant and stable plant foods in the society of early humanity, just as they exist in every modern gatherer society. Likewise, Festinger referred to Paleolithic access to considerable food without a great deal of effort, adding that contemporary groups that still live on hunting and gathering do very well, even though they have been pushed into very marginal habitats. As Hole and Flannery summarized, no group on Earth has more leisure time than hunters and gatherers, who spend it primarily on games, conversation, and relaxing. They have much more free time, adds Binford, than do modern industrial or farm workers, or even professors of archaeology. The non-domesticated know that, as Vannegut put it, only the present can be total. This by itself means that they live life with incomparably greater immediacy, density, and passion than we do. It has been said that some revolutionary days are worth centuries. Until then, we look before and after, as Shelley wrote, and sigh for what is not. The Mbuti believe that by a correct fulfillment of the present, the past and the future will take care of themselves. Primitive peoples do not live through memories and generally have no interest in birthdays or measuring their ages. As for the future, they have little desire to control what does not yet exist, just as they have little desire to control nature. Their moment-by-moment joining with the flux and flow of the natural world does not preclude an awareness of the seasons, but this does not constitute an alienated time consciousness that robs them of the present. Though contemporary gatherer-hunters eat more meat than their prehistoric forebears, vegetable foods still constitute the mainstay of their diet in tropical and subtropical regions. Both the Kalahari San and the Hasda of East Africa, where game is more abundant than in the Kalahari, rely on gathering for 80% of their sustenance. The Kong branch of the San search for more than 100 different kinds of plants and exhibit no nutritional deficiency. This is similar to the healthful, varied diet of Australian foragers. The overall diet of gatherers is better than that of cultivators. Starvation is very rare, and their health status generally superior, with much less chronic disease. Lauren van der Post expressed wonder at the exuberant San laugh, which rises sheer from the stomach, a laugh you never hear among civilized people. He found this emblematic of a great vigor and clarity of senses that yet manages to withstand and elude the onslaught of civilization. Truswell and Hansen may have encountered it in the person of a San who had survived an unarmed fight with a leopard. Although injured, he had killed the animal with his bare hands. The Andaman Islanders west of Thailand have no leaders, no idea of symbolic representation, and no domesticated animals. There is also an absence of aggression, violence, and disease. Wounds heal surprisingly quickly, and their sight and hearing are particularly acute. They are said to have declined since European intrusion in the mid-19th century, but exhibit other such remarkable physical traits as a natural immunity to malaria, skin with sufficient elasticity to rule out post-childbirth stretch marks and the wrinkling we associate with aging, and an unbelievable strength of teeth. Cipriani reported seeing children of 10 to 15 years crush nails with them. He also testified to the Andamese practice of collecting honey with no protective clothing at all. Yet they are never stung, and watching them one felt in the presence of some age-old mystery lost by the civilized world. De Vries has cited a wide range of contrasts by which the superior health of gatherer-hunters can be established, including an absence of degenerative diseases and mental disabilities, and childbirth without difficulty or pain. He also points out that this begins to erode from the moment of contact with civilization. Relatedly, there is a great deal of evidence not only for physical and emotional vigor among primitives, but also concerning their heightened sensory abilities. Darwin described people at the southernmost tip of South America who went about almost naked in frigid conditions, while Peaslee observed aborigines who were renowned for their ability to live through bitterly cold desert nights without any form of clothing. Levi Strauss was astounded to learn of a particular South American tribe which was able to see the planet Venus in full daylight, a feat comparable to that of the North African Dogon, who consider Sirius B the most important star, somehow aware, without instruments, of a star that can only be found with the most powerful of telescopes. In this vein, Boyden recounted the Bushman ability to see 4 of the moons of Jupiter with the naked eye. In The Harmless People, Marshall told how one Bushman walked unerringly to a spot in a vast plain with no bush or tree to mark place, and pointed out a blade of grass with an almost invisible filament of vine around it. He had encountered it months before in the rainy season when it was green. Now, in parched weather, he dug there to expose a succulent root and quenched his thirst. Also in the Kalahari Desert, Van der Post meditated upon San or Bushman communion with nature, a level of experience that could almost be called mystical. For instance, they seemed to know what it actually felt like to be an elephant, a lion, an antelope, a steenbok, a lizard, a striped mouse, mantis, baobab tree, yellow-crested cobra, or starry-eyed amaryllis, to mention only a few of the brilliant multitudes through which they moved. It seems almost pedestrian to add that gatherer-hunters have often been remarked to possess tracking skills that virtually defy rational explanation. Röhrlich-Levitt noted, "The data show that gatherer-hunters are generally non-territorial and bilocal, reject group aggression and competition, share their resources freely, value egalitarianism and personal autonomy in the context of group cooperation, and are indulgent and loving with children." Dozens of studies stress communal sharing and egalitarianism as perhaps the defining traits of such groups. Lee referred to the universality among foragers of sharing, while Marshall's classic 1961 work spoke of the ethic of generosity and humility in forming a strongly egalitarian gatherer-hunter orientation. Tanaka provides a typical example. The most admired character trait is generosity, and the most despised and disliked are stinginess and selfishness. Baer listed egalitarianism, democracy, personalism, individuation, nurturance as key virtues of the non-civilized, and Lee cited an absolute aversion to rank distinctions among simple foraging peoples around the world. Leacock and Lee specified that any assumption of authority within the group leads to ridicule or anger among the Kung, as has been recorded for the Mbuti, the Hasda, and the Montagnese Naskapi, among others. Not even the father of an extended family can tell his sons and daughters what to do. Most people appear to operate on their own internal schedules, reported Lee of the Kung of Botswana. Ingold judged that in most hunting and gathering societies, a supreme value is placed upon the principle of individual autonomy, similar to Wilson's finding of an ethic of independence that is common to the focused, open societies. The esteemed field anthropologist Radden went so far as to say, free scope is allowed for every conceivable kind of personality outlet or expression in primitive society. No moral judgment is passed on any aspect of human personality as such. Turnbull looked on the structure of Mbuti social life as an apparent vacuum, a lack of internal system that is almost anarchical. According to Duffy, the Mbuti are naturally acephalous. They do not have leaders or rulers, and decisions concerning the band are made by consensus. There is an enormous qualitative difference between foragers and farmers in this regard, as in so many others. For instance, agricultural Bantu tribes, for example the Saga, surround the San and are organized by kingship, hierarchy, and work. The San exhibit egalitarianism, autonomy, and sharing. Domestication is the principle which accounts for this drastic distinction. Domination within a society is not unrelated to domination of nature. In gatherer-hunter societies, on the other hand, no strict hierarchy exists between the human and the non-human species, and relations among foragers are likewise non-hierarchical. The non-domesticated typically view the animals they hunt as equals. This essentially egalitarian relationship is ended by the advent of domestication. When progressive estrangement from nature became outright social control, agriculture, more than just social attitudes changed. Descriptions by sailors and explorers who arrived in newly discovered regions tell how wild mammals and birds originally showed no fear at all of the human invaders. A few contemporary gatherers practice no hunting before outside contact, but while the majority certainly do hunt, it is not normally an aggressive act. Turnbull observed Mbuti hunting as quite without any aggressive spirit, even carried out with a sort of regret. Hewitt reported a sympathy bond between hunter and hunted among the Zan Bushmen he encountered in the 19th century. As regards violence among gatherer hunters, Lee found that the Kung hate fighting and think anybody who fought would be stupid. The Mbuti, by Duffy's account, look on any form of violence between one person and another with great abhorrence and distaste, and never represent it in their dancing or play acting. Homicide and suicide, concluded Bodley, are both decidedly uncommon among undisturbed gatherer hunters. The warlike nature of Native American peoples was often fabricated to add legitimacy to European aims of conquest. The foraging Comanche maintained their non-violent ways for centuries before the European invasion, becoming violent only upon contact with marauding civilization. The development of symbolic culture, which rapidly led to agriculture, is linked through ritual to alienated social life among extant foraging groups. Bloch found a correlation between levels of ritual and hierarchy. Put negatively, Woodburn could see the connection between an absence of ritual and the absence of specialized roles and hierarchy among the Hasda of Tanzania. Turner's study of the West African Ndembu revealed a profusion of ritual structures and ceremonies intended to redress the conflicts arising from the breakdown of an earlier, more seamless society. These ceremonies and structures function in a politically integrative way. Ritual is a repetitive activity for which outcomes and responses are essentially assured by social contract. It conveys the message that symbolic practice via group membership and social rules provides control. Ritual fosters the concept of control or domination and has been seen to tend toward leadership roles and centralized political structures. A monopoly of ceremonial institutions clearly extends the concept of authority and may itself be the original formal authority. Among agricultural tribes of New Guinea, leadership and the inequality it implies are based upon participation in hierarchies of ritual initiation or upon shamanistic spirit mediumship. In the role of shamans, we see a concrete practice of ritual as it contributes to domination in human society. Radin discussed the same marked tendency among Asian and North American tribal peoples for shamans or medicine men to organize and develop the theory that they alone are in communication with the supernatural. This exclusive access seems to empower them at the expense of the rest. Lommel saw an increase in the shaman's psychic potency counterbalanced by a weakening of potency in other members of the group. This practice has fairly obvious implications for power relationships in other areas of life and contrasts with earlier periods devoid of religious leadership. The Batuque of Brazil are host to shamans who each claim control over certain spirits and attempt to sell supernatural services to clients, rather like priests of competing sects. Specialists of this type in magically controlling nature would naturally come to control men too, in the opinion of Muller. In fact, the shaman is often the most powerful individual in pre-agricultural societies. He is in a position to institute change. Johannesson offers the thesis that resistance to the innovation of planting was overcome by the influence of shamans, among the Indians of the American Southwest, for instance. Similarly, Marquardt has suggested that ritual authority structures have played an important role in the initiation and organization of production in North America. Another student of American groups saw an important connection between shamans' role in mastering wildness in nature and an emerging subordination of women. Berndt has discussed the importance among Aborigines of ritual sexual division of labor in the development of negative sex roles, while Randolph comes straight to the point. Ritual activity is needed to create proper men and women. There is no reason in nature for gender divisions, argues Bender. They have to be created by proscription and taboo. They have to be naturalized through ideology and ritual. But gatherer-hunter societies, by their very nature, deny ritual its potential to domesticate women. The structure, non-structure of egalitarian bands, even those most oriented toward hunting, includes a guarantee of autonomy to both sexes. This guarantee is the fact that the materials of subsistence are equally available to women and men, and that further, the success of the band is dependent on cooperation based on that autonomy. The spheres of the sexes are often somewhat separate, but inasmuch as the contribution of women is generally at least equal to that of men, social equality of the sexes is a key feature of forager societies. Many anthropologists, in fact, have found the status of women in forager groups to be higher than in any other type of society. In all major decisions, observed Turnbull of the Mbuti, men and women have equal say, hunting and gathering being equally important. He made it clear that there is sexual differentiation, probably a good deal more than was the case with their distant forebears, but without any sense of superordination or subordination. Men actually work more hours than women among the Kung, according to Post and Taylor. It should be added, in terms of the division of labor common among contemporary gatherer hunters, that this differentiation of roles is by no means universal. Nor was it when the Roman historian Tacitus wrote of the Feni of the Baltic region that the women support themselves by hunting exactly like the men and count their lot happier than that of others who groan over field labor. Or when Procopius found in the 6th century AD that the Serithifini of what is now Finland neither till the land themselves nor do their women work it for them, but the women regularly join the men in hunting. The Tiwi women of Melville Island regularly hunt, as do the Agta women in the Philippines. In Mbuti society, there is little specialization according to sex. Even the hunt is a joint effort, reports Turnbull, and Kotlow testifies that among the traditional Eskimos it is or was a cooperative enterprise for the whole family group. Darwin found another aspect of sexual equality. In utterly barbarous tribes, the women have more power in choosing, rejecting, and tempting their lovers, or of afterwards changing their husbands, than might have been expected. The Kung Bushmen and Mbuti exemplify this female autonomy, as reported by Marshall and Thomas. Women apparently leave a man whenever they are unhappy with their marriage. concluded Begler. Marshall also found that rape was extremely rare or absent among the Kung. An intriguing phenomenon concerning gatherer-hunter women is their ability to prevent pregnancy in the absence of any contraception. Many hypotheses have been put forth and debunked, for example, conception somehow related to levels of body fat. What seems a very plausible explanation is based on the fact that undomesticated people are very much more in tune with their physical selves. Foraging women's senses and processes are not alienated from themselves or dulled. Control over childbearing is probably less than mysterious to those whose bodies are not foreign objects to be acted upon. The Pygmies of Zaire celebrate the first menstrual period of every girl with a great festival of gratitude and rejoicing. The young woman feels pride and pleasure, and the entire band expresses its happiness. Among agricultural villages, however, a menstruating woman is regarded as unclean and dangerous to be quarantined by taboo. The relaxed, egalitarian relationship between Sandmen and women, with its flexibility of roles and mutual respect, impressed Draper. A relationship, she made clear, that endures as long as they remain gatherer-hunters and no longer. Duffy found that each child in an Mbuti camp calls every man father and every woman mother. Forager children receive far more care, time, and attention than do those in civilization's isolated nuclear families. Post and Taylor described the almost permanent contact with their mothers and other adults that Bushman children enjoy. Kung infants studied by Ainsworth showed marked precocity of early cognitive and motor skills development. This was attributed both to the exercise and stimulation produced by unrestricted freedom of movement and to the high degree of physical warmth and closeness between Kung parents and children. Draper could see that competitiveness in games is almost entirely lacking among the Kung. As Shostak observed, Kung boys and girls playing together and sharing most games. She also found that children are not prevented from experimental sex play, consonant with the freedom of older Mbuti youth to indulge in premarital sex with enthusiasm and delight. The Zuni have no sense of sin, Ruth Benedict wrote in a related vein. Chastity as a way of life is regarded with great disfavor. Pleasant relations between the sexes are merely one aspect of pleasant relations with human beings. Sex is an incident in a happy life. Kuntz and Henderson point to a growing body of evidence in support of the proposition that relations between the sexes are most egalitarian in the simplest foraging societies. Women play an essential role in traditional agriculture, but receive no corresponding status for their contribution, unlike the case of gatherer-hunter society. As with plants and animals, so are women subject to domestication with the coming of agriculture. Culture, securing its foundations with the new order, requires the firm subjugation of instinct, freedom, and sexuality. All disorder must be banished, the elemental and spontaneous taken firmly in hand. Women's creativity and their very being as sexual persons are pressured to give way to the role expressed in all peasant religions of Great Mother, that is, fecund breeder of men and food. The men of the South American Munduruk, a farming tribe, refer to plants and sex in the same phrase about subduing women: we tame them with the banana. Simone de Beauvoir recognized in the equation of the plow and the phallus a symbol of male authority over women. Among the Amazonian Jivaro, another agricultural group, women are beasts of burden and the personal property of men. The abduction of adult women is a prominent part of much warfare by these lowland South American tribes. Brutalization and isolation of women seem to be functions of agricultural societies, and the female continues to perform most or even all of the work in such groups. Headhunting is practiced by the above-mentioned groups as part of endemic warfare over coveted agricultural land. Headhunting and near-constant warring is also witnessed among the farming tribes of Highlands, New Guinea. Lenski and Lenski's 1974 research concluded that warfare is rare among foragers, but becomes extremely common with agrarian societies. As Wilson put it succinctly, revenge, feuds, rioting, warfare, and battle seem to emerge among and to be typical of domesticated peoples. Tribal conflicts, Godelier argues, are explainable primarily by reference to colonial domination and should not be seen as having an origin in the functioning of pre-colonial structures. Certainly, contact with civilization can have an unsettling degenerative effect. But Godelier's Marxism, namely unwillingness to question domestication and production, is, one suspects, relevant to such a judgment. Thus, it could be said that the copper Eskimos, who have a significant incidence of homicide within their group, owe this violence to the impact of outside influences, but their reliance on domesticated dogs should also be noted. Ahrens has asserted, paralleling Godelier to some extent, that cannibalism as a cultural phenomenon is a fiction, invented and promoted by agencies of outside conquest. But there is documentation of this practice among, once again, peoples involved in domestication. The studies by Hogg, for example, reveal its presence among certain African tribes, steeped in ritual and grounded in agriculture. Cannibalism is generally a form of cultural control of chaos, in which the victim represents animality, or all that should be tamed. Significantly, one of the important myths of Fiji Islanders, how the Fijians first became cannibals, is literally a tale of planting. Similarly, the highly domesticated and time-conscious Aztecs practiced human sacrifice as a gesture to tame unruly forces and uphold the social equilibrium of a very alienated society. As Norbeck pointed out, non-domesticated, culturally impoverished societies are devoid of cannibalism and human sacrifice. As for one of the basic underpinnings of violence in more complex societies, Barnes found that reports in the ethnographic literature of territorial struggles between gatherer-hunters are extremely rare. Kung boundaries are vague and undefended. Pandaram territories overlap, and individuals go where they please. Hasda move freely from region to region. Boundaries and trespass have little or no meaning to the Mbuti, and Australian Aborigines reject territorial or social demarcations. An ethic of generosity and hospitality takes the place of exclusivity. Gatherer-hunter peoples have developed no conception of private property in the estimation of Kitwood. As noted above in reference to sharing, and with Sansom's characterization of Aborigines as people without property, foragers do not share civilization's obsession with externals. Mine and thine, the seeds of all mischief, have no place with them, wrote Pietro of the native North Americans encountered on the second voyage of Columbus. The Bushmen have no sense of possession, according to Post, and Lee saw them making no sharp dichotomy between the resources of the natural environment and the social wealth. There is a line between nature and culture again, and the non-civilized choose the former. There are many gatherer-hunters who could carry all that they make use of in one hand, who die with pretty much what they had as they came into the world. Once humans shared everything. With agriculture, ownership becomes paramount, and a species presumes to own the world. A deformation the imagination could scarcely equal. Salin spoke of this eloquently. The world's most primitive people have few possessions, but they are not poor. Poverty is not a certain small amount of goods, nor is it just a relation between means and ends. Above all, it is a relation between people. Poverty is a social status. As such, it is the invention of civilization. The common tendency of gatherer-hunters to reject farming until it was absolutely thrust upon them bespeaks a nature-culture divide also present in the Mbuti recognition that if one of them becomes a villager, he is no longer an Mbuti. They know that forager band and agriculturalist village are opposed societies with opposed values. At times, however, the crucial factor of domestication can be lost sight of. The historic foraging populations of the western coast of North America have long been considered anomalous among foragers, declared Cohen. As Kelly also put it, tribes of the northwest coast break all the stereotypes of hunter-gatherers. These foragers, whose main sustenance is fishing, have exhibited such alienated features as chiefs, hierarchy, warfare, and slavery. But almost always overlooked are their domesticated tobacco and domesticated dogs. Even this celebrated anomaly contains features of domestication. Its practice, from ritual to production, with various accompanying forms of domination, seems to anchor and promote the facets of decline from an earlier state of grace. Thomas provides another North American example, that of the Great Basin Shoshones and three of their component societies, the Cowich Mountain Shoshones, Reese River Shoshones, and Owens Valley Paiutes. The three groups showed distinctly different levels of agriculture, with increasing territoriality or ownership and hierarchy closely corresponding to higher degrees of domestication. To define a disalienated world would be impossible and even undesirable, but I think we can and should try to reveal the unworld of today and how it got this way. We have taken a monstrously wrong turn with symbolic culture and division of labor, from a place of enchantment, understanding, and wholeness to the absence we find at the heart of the doctrine of progress. Empty and emptying, the logic of domestication with its demand to control everything now shows us the ruin of the civilization that ruins the rest. Assuming the inferiority of nature enables the domination of cultural systems that soon will make the very earth uninhabitable. Postmodernism says to us that a society without power relations can only be an abstraction. This is a lie unless we accept the death of nature and renounce what once was and what we can find again. Turnbull spoke of the intimacy between Mbuti people and the forest, dancing almost as if making love to the forest, in the bosom of a life of equals that is no abstraction, that struggles to endure. They were dancing with the forest, dancing with the moon,